Whispers echoed through the crystal-lit ballroom as the champagne glasses shattered. Nobody expected the clumsy, oversized glasses-wearing nobody to step in front of the city's most powerful alpha. But when the air grew thick with a terrifying, suffocating pheromone, the high society elites realized they had just awakened an enigma. Gideon Croft stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored charcoal suit. As the youngest CEO to ever take over the Croft family enterprise, he was a prime alpha. His scent, a sharp, commanding blend of winter pine and crisp ozone, usually kept board members and rivals in check. But lately, the corporate wolves were circling. Behind him, a loud clatter broke the heavy silence. A stack of manila folders spilled across the mahogany floor. "I am so sorry, Mr. Croft," a soft, slightly breathless voice muttered. Gideon turned, his hardened expression immediately softening. Kneeling on the floor was Caleb Wright. Caleb was by all societal appearances the most unremarkable man in the entire high-rise building. He wore thick, heavy-rimmed glasses that constantly slipped down the bridge of his nose. His clothes were always one size too large. Today, it was a baggy beige cardigan over a plain white button-down, hiding whatever physique he might have had. Most of the office assumed Caleb was a defective beta, or a very subdued omega, who masked his scent heavily. In a world ruled by dynamic hierarchies, Caleb was practically invisible. "Leave it, Caleb," Gideon said, stepping away from the window to help gather the scattered documents. "You don't need to apologize. The cleaning staff can handle the rest." "No, I've got it," Caleb insisted, pushing his glasses up with his index finger. He kept his head bowed, deliberately avoiding eye contact. "These are the final projections for the Montgomery merger. You need them for the gala tonight." Gideon sighed, handing a few stray papers back to him. The world saw Gideon as a ruthless, untouchable alpha, but around Caleb, his defenses completely dismantled. There was a quiet loyalty to Caleb, a steadfast presence that grounded Gideon when the pressures of his status threatened to crush him. They had been partners in secret for nearly a year. Behind closed doors, away from the prying eyes of the elite circles, their dynamic shifted entirely. But in public, Caleb insisted on playing the bumbling, incompetent assistant. It was a protective measure, he claimed, though Gideon hated seeing the man he loved treated like dirt by their peers. The heavy oak door to the office swung open without a knock. Harrison Brooks sauntered in a smirk, playing on his aristocratic features. Harrison was another dominant alpha heir to the Brooks logistics empire, and a persistent thorn in Gideon's side. His scent, a cloying, aggressive musk of burnt amber, immediately flooded the room, an intentional challenge. "Gideon," Harrison drawled, barely glancing at Caleb, who was still gathering papers near his expensive leather shoes. "Still keeping the charity case around, I see." Gideon's jaw clenched, a low rumble of a growl vibrating in his chest. "Harrison, you don't have an appointment, and you will speak to Caleb with respect." Harrison laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He deliberately stepped closer to Caleb, forcing his overpowering alpha pheromones downward in a textbook display of dominance meant to make weaker dynamics submit. Respect for a clumsy beta who can't even hold a stack of papers. "Please, Gideon, your bleeding heart is going to sink your company. If you're going to survive the Shark Tank at the Harrington Gala tonight, you need to surround yourself with actual power. Not whatever this is." Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't cower. To Harrison, it looked like the dull, blank reaction of someone too stupid to recognize a threat. But Gideon saw the minute tightening of Caleb's jaw, the subtle narrowing of his eyes behind the thick lenses. What Harrison didn't know, what no one in the city knew, was that Caleb Wright was not a beta. He was an enigma, a dynamic so rare it was considered a myth by most modern medical textbooks. Enigmas possessed a biological presence that didn't just match alphas, it shattered them. They were the apex capable of overriding an alpha's commands and breaking their wills entirely. Caleb had spent his entire life suppressing his true nature with heavy blockers and a carefully crafted persona, terrified of the government scrutiny and isolation that came with being an enigma. He wanted a normal life. He wanted Gideon. And Gideon had sworn to protect Caleb's secret, even if it meant biting his tongue when arrogant fools like Harrison mouthed off. "Caleb is attending the gala as my +1, Gideon stated coldly, stepping between Harrison and Caleb. He flared his own pine scent, effectively neutralizing Harrison's aggressive amber. "If you have a problem with my guest list, you can take it up with the Harringtons. Now get out of my office." Harrison took a step back, his eyes flashing with irritation. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you, Croft. The board is watching. Show weakness tonight and they'll strip you of your majority shares faster than your little pet here can drop a coffee cup." With a final sneer, Harrison turned and exited, letting the heavy door slam shut. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Gideon turned back to Caleb, who was now standing calmly dusting off his slacks. "I hate him," Gideon muttered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I hate the way they all look at you, Caleb. You don't have to do this. We could tell them. We could tell the board." "No." Caleb interrupted his voice, losing the stuttering, timid edge it held moments before. It dropped an octave smooth and quietly commanding. "You know what happens to enigmas, Gideon? We become laboratory rats. We become weapons for corporate warfare. I am perfectly fine being your nerdy assistant." Gideon stepped closer, wrapping his arms around Caleb's waist and burying his face in the crook of Caleb's neck. Underneath the chemical blockers, Gideon could detect the faintest trace of Caleb's true scent. Something dark, intoxicating like petrichor and deep, crushing ocean water. It made Gideon's inner alpha purr in absolute submission, a feeling he found intensely comforting. "Just promise me you'll stay close tonight," Gideon whispered. "Harrison is planning something. I can feel it." Caleb gently stroked Gideon's back. "I'm always watching your back, Alpha. Let them mock the nerdy beta. It just means they'll never see me coming." The Harrington estate was a sprawling mansion of white marble and gold accents, situated on the most exclusive cliffside in the city. The annual winter gala was the absolute pinnacle of high society, a glittering battleground where fortunes were made and destroyed over flutes of vintage champagne. Gideon arrived looking like a king. His midnight blue tuxedo fit his broad frame flawlessly, his presence commanding the attention of every photographer and elite guest on the red carpet. Beside him, Caleb looked deliberately out of place. He wore a standard, off-the-rack black suit that boxed out his shoulders, his thick glasses catching the glare of the camera flashes. He kept his shoulders hunched, trailing slightly behind Gideon, the perfect picture of an intimidated subordinate. As they entered the grand ballroom, the whispers began almost immediately. "Is that Croft? He brought the assistant again. I heard the board is furious. How can an alpha lead a multi-billion-dollar tech firm when he's tied down by such a pathetic weak link? Look at him. He looks like he's going to faint from the crowd." Caleb heard every word his face, a mask of mild anxiety. Inside, he felt nothing but profound boredom. He accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter, taking up his position near a massive ice sculpture of a swan, allowing Gideon to mingle. Gideon was immediately swarmed by investors and rival CEOs. He navigated the conversations with lethal charm, but Caleb could see the strain around his eyes. The corporate vultures were testing his boundaries. Across the room, Harrison Brooks was holding court with several key members of Gideon's board of directors. Harrison caught Caleb's eye and offered a sickeningly sweet, mocking toast with his whiskey glass. Caleb merely adjusted his glasses and looked away, taking a sip of his water. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the ballroom began to shift. It was subtle at first, a heaviness in the air. Caleb, highly attuned to pheromonal shifts due to his ENIGMA biology, noticed the sudden concentration of alpha scents gathering near the private velvet-roped VIP lounges at the back of the hall. He tracked Gideon's movements. Harrison had cornered Gideon, flanking him with 4 other large, imposing alphas. They were backing Gideon into the secluded lounge area, away from the main crowd and the security cameras. Caleb set his glass down on a nearby table. The clumsy, slouched posture vanished in a fraction of a second. Inside the semi-private lounge, Gideon found himself backed against a heavy mahogany billiards table. Harrison stood at the front of the pack, his amber scent flaring aggressively, mixing with the oppressive pheromones of the other alphas. It was a coordinated, deeply illegal dominance attack. In high society, using combined pheromones to force a rival alpha into a state of biological submission was grounds for criminal charges, but it was incredibly hard to prove. "Sign the merger transfer, Gideon." Harrison sneered, tossing a silver pen and a folded legal document onto the billiards table. "The board agrees. You're too soft. You're embarrassing the industry with your little charity projects. Submit the shares to Brooks Logistics, and we'll let you keep a seat on the advisory council." Gideon gritted his teeth, his own pine scent flaring in desperate defense. But 5-1 were impossible odds, even for him. The sheer weight of the combined alpha pheromones was physically crushing. His knees trembled, his instincts screaming at him to bare his neck and submit to the superior pack. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "You're out of your mind," Gideon choked out, gripping the edge of the table to keep himself upright. "Am I?" Harrison took a step closer, his eyes flashing with feral intent. "You're weak, Croft. You care too much about that useless beta outside. Maybe after you signed this, we'll go have some fun with him. See if we can make him cry before we kick him to the curb." A low, guttural growl ripped from Gideon's throat at the threat to Caleb, but the effort exhausted his remaining strength. His legs buckled, forcing him to one knee on the plush carpet. Harrison threw his head back and laughed. "There it is, the great Gideon Croft brought to heel." "I think," a quiet, chillingly calm voice echoed from the entrance of the lounge. "You have severely miscalculated." Harrison and the other alphas snapped their heads around. Standing in the archway was Caleb. But it wasn't the Caleb they knew. He wasn't hunched over. He stood tall, his posture rigidly straight, revealing a broad, powerful chest beneath the ill-fitting suit jacket. He reached up, slowly pulling the thick, oversized glasses from his face. He tossed them casually to the side. They hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, the lenses splintering into spider webs. "Get out of here, you stupid beta!" one of Harrison's cronies barked, stepping forward and flaring his scent to terrify the intruder. "Before I snap your neck." Caleb didn't blink. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small silver case. Inside were his suppressant pills. He crushed the case in his fist, letting the mangled metal drop to the floor. "I have spent 3 years," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, echoing baritone that seemed to vibrate the very glass in the room, "shrinking myself so fragile, insecure men like you could feel big." Suddenly the air in the room changed. The oppressive, choking mixture of alpha scents that had brought Gideon to his knees was instantly obliterated. It wasn't pushed away, it was devoured. A new scent flooded the lounge. It was the smell of a brewing hurricane, of dark, bottomless ocean trenches and raw, crackling ozone. It was heavy, primordial, and utterly terrifying. The crony who had stepped forward suddenly gasped, clutching his throat. His eyes widened in absolute primal terror as his knees gave out entirely. He collapsed to the floor, violently shaking his inner alpha, screaming in submission to an apex predator it didn't even know existed. Harrison staggered back, the color draining from his arrogant face. His amber scent vanished, completely suppressed by the crushing weight of Caleb's presence. "What? What are you?" Harrison stammered, his body betraying him, as his spine forcibly curved into a submissive bow. Caleb stepped into the room, his eyes dark and merciless. He walked past the trembling alphas, who were now plastered to the floor, unable to lift their heads under the crushing, suffocating weight of an Enigma's unbridled dominance. He stopped directly in front of Harrison. "I am the man you just threatened," Caleb whispered, leaning in close so Harrison could see the cold, unyielding rage in his eyes. Harrison's knees slammed into the plush carpet with a sickening thud. The pristine, tailored fabric of his expensive trousers tore, but he didn't even register the physical pain. Every single biological instinct inside his brain was screaming at him to submit, to flatten himself against the floor, to bare his throat to the monstrous entity standing above him. Sweat poured down Harrison's face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. His lungs burned. The air in the VIP lounge had become incredibly dense, saturated with the terrifying scent of a brewing tempest, crushing ocean depths and violent ozone. It was an Enigma's pheromonal dominance, a biological weapon so potent it bypassed conscious thought and attacked the nervous system directly. "What?" Harrison choked his vocal cords, trembling so violently he could barely form the word. He stared up at Caleb, gasping for oxygen. "What are you?" Caleb tilted his head, his expression devoid of any warmth or mercy. Without the oversized, thick-rimmed glasses obscuring his face, his features were strikingly sharp, aristocratic, and fiercely intense. He looked down at the trembling alpha, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "I am the variable you failed to account for." Caleb said, his voice a low, vibrating baritone that sent fresh shockwaves of terror through the room. "You strut around this city, flaunting your status, assuming your little backing from the Blackstone Group makes you a god among men. You wear that ridiculous Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime on your wrist, thinking wealth equates to actual power." Caleb scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "You have absolutely no idea what real power looks like." Around them, the 4 other alphas who had cornered Gideon were faring even worse. 2 of them had curled into the fetal position, quietly whimpering as their bodies went into a state of involuntary shock. The sheer weight of Caleb's aura was suffocating their inner dynamics. Gideon, still on one knee by the mahogany billiards table, was experiencing something entirely different. While Harrison and his cronies were being crushed, Gideon felt a sudden, inexplicable rush of warmth. Caleb's overwhelming scent, which was a weapon of mass destruction to everyone else, felt like a protective shield wrapping around Gideon. His own inner alpha didn't feel threatened. Instead, it purred with a deep, primal satisfaction. This terrifying apex being was his mate. Caleb stepped over one of the whimpering cronies and picked up the silver pen and the merger contract Harrison had tossed onto the table. He held the document up to the dim lighting of the lounge. Brooks Logistics absorbing Croft Enterprises. Caleb read aloud, his tone laced with heavy mockery. A hostile takeover masked as a corporate merger. And you thought you could achieve this by acting like a feral street gang. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, Caleb ripped the thick legal document in half. Then in quarters. He let the pieces flutter down onto Harrison's trembling shoulders like mocking confetti. "Listen to me very carefully, Harrison." Caleb commanded, stepping closer until the toe of his polished shoe rested against Harrison's knee. "If you ever come near Gideon again, if you ever attempt to manipulate Croft Enterprises' board of directors again, if you so much as look in our general direction at a public event, I will stop hiding. I will publicly dismantle your entire empire, and I will release enough of my pheromones in your corporate headquarters to ensure you and your entire executive team spend the next decade in a psychiatric ward, recovering from biological submission, trauma. Do you understand me? Harrison could only nod, tears of sheer, unadulterated terror welling in his eyes. The great arrogant alpha had been reduced to a weeping, subservient mess in less than 3 minutes. Caleb's gaze lingered on him for a second longer, ensuring the lesson was permanently seared into Harrison's psyche before he turned his attention to Gideon. Instantly, the oppressive, terrifying storm in the room evaporated. The heavy ozone scent softened, transforming into the soothing, refreshing smell of rain on dry earth. Caleb knelt in front of Gideon, his fierce expression melting into one of absolute devotion and gentle concern. "Are you all right?" Caleb whispered, reaching out to cup Gideon's jaw. His thumb brushed affectionately across Gideon's cheekbone. Gideon leaned into the touch, letting out a long, shaky breath as his strength slowly returned. He looked at Caleb, truly seeing the enigma in all his unsuppressed, glorious power for the first time in a public setting. Gideon started, a breathless chuckle escaping his lips. "I think I'm entirely in love with you." A genuine, breathtaking smile broke across Caleb's face. "I told you I was watching your back. Come on, let's get you out of here before the rest of the gala figures out what just happened." Caleb helped Gideon to his feet. Gideon wrapped an arm around Caleb's waist, no longer caring about appearances or what the elite society thought of his nerdy assistant. They walked out of the VIP lounge together, leaving 5 of the city's most powerful alphas trembling on the floor, completely broken. As they re-entered the main ballroom, a profound silence rippled through the crowd. The guests couldn't know exactly what had transpired in the private room, but they could sense the residual shift in the air. The lingering trace of an enigma's pheromones was enough to make every alpha and beta in the room subconsciously part, creating a wide, unobstructed path for Gideon and Caleb. Caleb walked with his head held high, his posture exuding a quiet, lethal confidence. He didn't need the glasses anymore. He didn't need the oversized, frumpy suits. The masquerade was over. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Croft Enterprises boardroom. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. News of the incident at the Harrington Gala had spread through the elite corporate whispers like wildfire. Rumors were chaotic. Some said Gideon had hired a specialized mercenary. Others claimed Harrison had suffered a sudden neurological breakdown. Arthur Pendleton, the senior board member and a notoriously strict traditionalist, sat at the head of the long glass table. He tapped his gold pen impatiently against his notepad. The other 10 board members murmured nervously among themselves. "This is completely unacceptable," Arthur barked, silencing the room. "Brooks Logistics pulled out of all joint ventures this morning. Harrison Brooks's legal team is threatening to contact the Federal Biological Regulatory Commission, claiming Gideon assaulted him with illegal synthetic pheromone weapons. We are facing a massive PR disaster." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Gideon walked in looking sharper and more commanding than he ever had. He wore a stunning, custom-tailored charcoal suit, his pine scent radiating a calm, absolute authority. But the board members barely noticed him. All eyes were completely glued to the man walking in right beside him. Caleb wore a sleek, pitch-black Tom Ford suit that perfectly hugged his broad, muscular frame. His hair, usually styled in a messy, unassuming mop, was slicked back, revealing piercing, intelligent eyes. There was no trace of the clumsy, stuttering beta assistant. He looked like an apex predator in a tailored disguise. "Good morning, gentlemen," Gideon said smoothly, taking his seat at the center of the table. He didn't take the head chair. He let his presence command the room from exactly where he sat. Caleb remained standing behind Gideon's right shoulder, a silent, imposing sentinel. Arthur Pendleton adjusted his tie, suddenly feeling uncomfortably hot. "Gideon, what is the meaning of this? And why is your assistant present at a closed-door executive meeting?" "Caleb is no longer my assistant," Gideon replied smoothly, interlacing his fingers on the glass table. "He is my newly appointed Chief Operating Officer." "And my mate." A collective gasp echoed around the room. An Alpha CEO claiming a seemingly ordinary staff member as a mate was scandalous enough, but making him COO was corporate suicide. "Have you lost your mind?" Arthur sputtered his face, turning a deep shade of crimson. "We are in the middle of a crisis. Harrison Brooks is going to destroy our stock prices with these synthetic weapon allegations, and you bring your charity case in here to play executive." Caleb stepped forward. He didn't flare his scent. He didn't need to. The sheer terrifying weight of his presence was enough to make every alpha in the room instinctively lean back in their expensive leather chairs. He placed a thick, sealed manila envelope on the glass table and slid it smoothly toward Arthur. "There were no synthetic weapons used last night, Mr. Pendleton." Caleb said, his voice calm, articulate, and dangerously soft. "Inside that envelope you will find certified medical documentation, fully verified and authenticated by the Genetic Research Division at Johns Hopkins Medicine. It confirms my biological dynamic." Arthur eyed the envelope like it was a live explosive. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and pulled out the crisp medical files. He scanned the first page, his eyes widening in absolute disbelief. He flipped to the second page, reading the heavily stamped and verified genetic markers. This is impossible," Arthur whispered, all the color draining from his face. He looked up at Caleb, his voice trembling. "Enigmas. They're theoretical. An evolutionary anomaly. They haven't been documented in this region for a century." "I assure you, Arthur, I am very real," Caleb replied evenly. "For years I chose to suppress my nature because I wanted a quiet life. I allowed men like Harrison Brooks, and frankly men like some of you in this room, to mock me, belittle me, and disrespect my alpha. I tolerated it for the sake of peace." Caleb leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the glass table. The subtle, terrifying scent of dark ocean depths began to slowly bleed into the room. "But my tolerance has officially expired," Caleb continued, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. "Brooks Logistics is withdrawing their bids because Harrison Brooks is utterly terrified of me. He knows that if he pursues this synthetic weapon lie, I will submit these very real medical files to the Federal Commission, and the entire world will know that the great Alpha Harrison Brooks was brought to his knees, crying by a man he called a useless beta." The boardroom was dead silent. The board members were completely paralyzed, caught between profound shock and primal awe. "Here is how this company will operate moving forward," Caleb said, standing tall once again. "Gideon Croft will continue to lead this enterprise. His decisions will be final. You will support his vision, and you will not question his authority. If anyone in this room feels they cannot align with this new paradigm, I highly suggest you sell your shares and exit the building immediately. Because if anyone attempts a boardroom coup or disrespects my mate ever again..." Caleb didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavily in the air, thick and suffocating. Arthur Pendleton swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the Johns Hopkins medical file to Gideon, and finally back to Caleb. The traditionalist in him was screaming, but the pragmatic businessman knew exactly what he was looking at. Having an Enigma backing their CEO wasn't a liability. It was the ultimate untouchable asset. No rival company would ever dare cross them again. Arthur cleared his throat, trying to regain a fraction of his composure. I believe the board fully supports Mr. Croft's ongoing leadership. And congratulations on your promotion, Mr. Wright. Gideon smirked, leaning back in his chair. Glad we are all on the same page. Meeting adjourned. The board members scrambled to pack up their briefcases, exiting the room with frantic haste, desperate to escape the overwhelming pressure of Caleb's presence. Within seconds, the large boardroom was completely empty, leaving only Gideon and Caleb. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. Gideon let out a long, rich laugh, standing up and turning to face Caleb. You realize half of them are probably going to need a change of trousers, right? Caleb's stoic, intimidating facade melted away entirely. He smiled a soft, incredibly fond expression that he reserved only for Gideon. He stepped into Gideon's personal space, sliding his arms around his mate's neck. They needed a reminder of who is actually in charge, Caleb murmured, leaning in until their foreheads rested against each other. You were incredible. Gideon breathed his hands naturally, finding Caleb's waist pulling him flush against his body. Though I have to admit I might miss the baggy sweaters just a little bit. Caleb chuckled, the sound deep and resonant. I'll save them for when we're at home. But out here in the real world, Caleb's eyes darkened with fierce, loving protectiveness. Nobody gets to look down on you ever again. Not while I'm breathing. Gideon captured Caleb's lips in a deep, passionate kiss. The world outside the glass walls of the skyscraper could gossip all they wanted. High society was irreparably shaken, and the dynamic hierarchy they all clung to had been shattered by the man everyone had completely ignored. The nerdy assistant was gone. In his place stood an enigma, the ultimate apex predator, holding the city's most powerful alpha, gently in his arms, ready to conquer whatever came next. If you loved this shocking Omegaverse twist and want to see more incredible stories where the underdog holds the ultimate power, we need your help to keep creating. Hit that like button right now. Share this thrilling drama with your friends and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment between Gideon and Caleb and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next steamy, dramatic BL adventure.